I thought the
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to bring this meeting of this public hearing of the City of Eugene to order. The first item on tonight's agenda will be a public hearing on an appeal of the hearings official's decision to approve a request for a zone change from the R1 low-density residential zone to the R1.5 row house zone. Before I begin the hearing, I would like to briefly go over the hearing procedure. The decision of the Planning Commission on this appeal is quasi-judicial, so we will use quasi-judicial format for this public hearing in accordance with applicable code requirements. The purpose of tonight's hearing is to receive relevant testimony on the appeal before us. We will not be making a decision on the appeal tonight. I want to remind everyone that your testimony must be directed toward the appeal issues and relevant criteria. No new evidence pertaining to appeal issues can be accepted by the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission can only accept an argument and analysis related to evidence that is already on the record. Those wishing to speak during this public hearing should have already submitted a completed green request to speak form to staff. If you wish to speak or if you have not already done so, please submit that form now. Once the public hearing is open, speakers will be called in the following order: those in support of the applicant, those in a neutral position, and those opposed to applicant or in support of the appeal. At the end of the testimony, we will ask for any staff response, and then the applicant will have an opportunity for rebuttal. I'm also supposed to remind everyone that the failure to raise an issue with sufficient specificity, I hope I got that right, specificity, to allow Planning Commission and parties to respond will preclude further appeal on that issue. Before we begin, the Eugene Code 9.7065 requires that the Planning Commissioners disclose any conflicts of interest, ex parte contacts, or biases, abstentions, or challenges to impartiality. Do any commissioners have anything to disclose? Apparently not. Now, staff will provide a brief introduction before we begin testimony.
Well, I'm Steve Oakes with the City of Eugene Planning. So for this, the first application on appeal is for a zone change from R1 low-density residential to R1.5 row house zone. The hearings official approved the zone change subject to a condition of approval that imposed a density cap on the site of 14 units per acre, which would allow the site to be divided up into 3 row house lots. Concurrent with the zone change application, the hearings official also approved a 3-lot tentative partition and adjustment review. The partition and adjustment review are contingent on zone change approval but are not subject to this appeal. The subject property is a .26 acre parcel located on tax lot 2100 of Assessor's Map 17033333 on the east side of Orchard Street between East 15th Avenue and East 17th Avenue. The Eugene hearings official held a public hearing for the subject application on August 24th, 2011. The hearings official issued a decision approving the concurrent applications on September 27th, 2011. On October 10th, 2011, an appeal was filed by Camilla Bayless and attorney Meg Kieran on behalf of the Fairmount neighbors. The Fairmount neighbors' appeal includes 2 primary issues with related sub-assignments of error. And also, since the appeal, now we've received testimony, both in email format and letters. And so we've had 2 emails that have been previously forwarded to you, one from Paul Conte dated October 24th and one from Bill Close dated October 24th that were already included on the disc. Since that time, we've received additional testimony, and what we'll do with that is collate it, make sure it's all it doesn't include any new evidence. Some of the emails have attached photos, so what we'll have to do is compare the photos to what's in the record to make sure there's no, determine what's new evidence, and then forward on that to you tomorrow. And then based on the available evidence and findings found in the staff report, starting at page 3 of the packet, staff continues to recommend that the Planning Commission deny the appeal and affirm the hearings official approval. And that completes the staff report unless there are any questions from the Planning Commission.
Steve? I will now open the public hearing with the applicant and those in support of the applicant. Please give your name and address when you speak. I'll be calling your name. Also, please limit your comments to 3 minutes, because we have quite a house full here. So the first person on the list is Peter Keys. Is that correct?
I thought I wasn't speaking in favor of the appeal, not in favor.
Yeah,
of
I think first we'll need to go to the applicant and applicant's representative. And
Okay. So the applicant is first then, or the applicant representative?
I didn't fill out a green slip yet.
Oh.
You can do it after. Okay.
It's an honor to go first.
Yep.
Members of the Commission, staff, I'm Bill Close, 375 West 4th Avenue, Suite 204. I'm out of breath because I went to the library because I was sure I had a notice from the city changing the location of the hearing to the Baskin-Tykeson room, but there's somebody else in that room. So here I am. I am representing the applicant tonight. I am going to speak for about 3 minutes, max. I have two things to say. My client totally agrees with the staff report recommending that you affirm the decision of the hearings official. In addition to that, I submitted a several-page letter outlining a completely different, fun, exciting, and novel theory for why the city should affirm this. And that boils down simply to, given the nature of the decision, state law prohibits applying any fuzzy standards. And really every issue that has been raised by the appellants invokes a fuzzy standard. And so our pitch is apply the state law and don't address them. Simply affirm the hearings official. I raised this theory because I fully anticipate that this is the kind of decision that could be appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals. This is a delicate neighborhood. It's a sensitive issue. These little step-ups in rezoning, and they draw a lot of attention. The neighborhood association has a lot of horsepower, and I expect it could be appealed. And so if it goes to LUBA, I want to be able to have this defensive theory articulated in writing so I can pitch it there. And that's pretty much it. I think I said 2 points, I'll make a third point. This little density increase rezoning is the kind of thing that is going to make the Eugene vision fly or not fly. Presently, the code allows this kind of step up in zoning in pretty narrow circumstances. The city's crafting its new vision for the next 20 years. I think it's going to come out of that process with a bigger window allowing more of these kind of step-ups. That's the only way the city's going to be able to get to going up instead of out. And so when you are thinking about the policy considerations here, think about that. It's not just about this application right now. It's really about the future. So I'm past my 3 minutes. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to, I think as the applicant, we should be able to rebut adverse testimony. Looking forward to that. Thank you.
So now I'm going to start on the green tags, I think. And the first name on the list here is Peter Keys.
This is opposition. This is for the appellant.
This is for the appellant?
This is for the appellant.
Right. Hi, my name is Peter Keys. I live at 1685 Skyline Boulevard. I'm also a professor of architecture at the University of Oregon. One of my specialties, actually my specialty, is housing. Specifically infill housing, a lot of community design and looking at issues. And one of the things I've been studying for many years is higher density housing built in single-family residential neighborhoods in Portland. I've got about 800 buildings in my database where I looked at the housing that was built along the streetcar lines in the pre-war era and how well it fits into the neighborhood. So I'm here in support of the appeal to this application because I see this as sort of contravening all the sort of things I've learned about what is successful for higher density housing fitting into an existing neighborhood. It's sort of The applicant just mentioned that we have this sort of Envision Eugene process going forward, and I'm very hopeful that out of that will come some vision of how we can actually do higher density. I'm in favor of higher density. I'm not in favor of higher density exploiting strange loopholes in the city's zoning ordinance that never seems to become in accordance with larger visions we might have for this city. And so I think that the applicants, the appeal that I have read that states that this is really ignoring the details of the neighborhood plan that have been agreed and worked out over many years makes perfect sense to me. I've spent countless hours, and I know many people have spent countless hours constantly trying to go to meetings, trying to work through the process in Eugene, and somehow we always seem to do this de facto rezoning where things without any thought behind them at all squeak through and really start ruining our neighborhoods. I'm very concerned by that. I've practically given up on parts of Eugene because of this process. And so I just see this as the latest example, and as we're about to do something that really maybe will set, and as the applicant said, this is going to be more of this coming down. Let's really think as a planning commission, what the planning should be for this city and what our vision is, and not simply, I know that you're interpreting this in narrow legalistic terms, but I see this as being indicative of everything that's wrong with planning in the city that has been in the 20 years I live here. So I'd ask you to sort of interpret this and look at the way the appeal has been phrased to try to stop this, and maybe we can come up with a better idea about how we really want to densify our neighborhood and make it work better for people who live there and for new development in the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. I'm sorry, Mr. Keys. Mr. Jeff Nelson is next.
Thank you. I have written testimony that I'll reference while I speak. My name is Jeff Nelson. I live at 2144 East 15th Avenue in Eugene. And I'd like to take a few moments just to talk about the approval criteria that the application must be consistent with the Metro Plan as well as the refinement plan. And so in that context, I'd like to give a brief overview of the property. It's zoned R1 currently. The property allows up to 2 dwelling units, which would be at 2 detached dwelling units. One of the, in that case, the owner of the property would have to be one of the occupants in the home. There are processes within the city that allow for density increases in R1. That would include a public planned unit development, and that process would be allowed for properties acquired within the refinement plan area that would be consistent with the refinement plan in terms of the density language in the refinement plan. So, and really the issue is that in my mind while staff may be confused, and the confusion is contagious with regards to, I think, the applicant, in my mind, when I explained it to my 9-year-old and my 6-year-old, they understood it completely. So I hope that the confusion is not contagious with you. So let's review then what the developer's options are with regards to the zone change. And again, there are 2 doors that are typically open to perhaps at least 2 doors open to applicants that want to increase density and in the neighborhood. One would be a zone change door and a planned unit development door, as an example. So in any neighborhood that's zoned with the overlay within the Metro Plan, I'll refer to the Metro Plan diagram, which is in the record. It's probably familiar with you all. That yellow area refers to low-density residential. So any low-density residential designated area cannot exceed the 14 dwelling units per net acre. So that happens anywhere, regardless of the refinement plan. So the only thing that the hearings official decision did, as well as the staff's proposal, was, and I raised this with staff with regards to the violation, one of the blatant violations of the Metro Plan. Running the numbers, the application as originally submitted, which was admittedly to increase density, would, and as the applicant just referenced today, to increase density, it would exceed the Metro Plan diagram designation for low-density residential. So that was one of the thresholds that needed to be met for the application.
Mr. Nelson, we need you to kind of wrap up.
Okay. The refinement plan requirement also says, though, that there are no the zone changes to increase residential density or residential intensity or commercial intensity are not supported by the plan. And the issue there then is that you cannot say that the 14 overlay satisfies that, because that's a separate and distinct requirement. So while the 14 overlay might satisfy the Metro plan, we've already walked through the issue that the refinement plan is consistent with the Metro plan, and therefore the refinement plan says you cannot increase density as the applicant would suggest. So with regards to Goal 10 and needed housing, I've already walked through in my written testimony that the applicant's argument is not well-founded, and essentially what happens is, because the refinement plan has been modified recently, approved by the Planning Commission, approved by the city, that this essentially is a collateral attack on the refinement plan language by city staff and the applicant. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Next speaker is Jeanette Bishop.
I didn't time it. I'm just going to read my statement to you, and I'll try to go fast. Jeanette Bishop, from 1620 Orchard. I'm almost straight across, almost, from this property that we're talking about. A second-generation Oregonian. My father, having been born in Oregon in 1886, I love Oregon, Eugene, and my alma mater, the U of O. I've lived in my current house for 40 years and love my neighborhood, except for some stresses created by the city and the university. Some years back, parking meters were installed on Agate Street, pushing students out to the Fairmount neighborhood to park, followed by fees for homeowners to park in front of their houses longer than 2 hours. More recently, people have been permitted to add housing of any description to their single-family lots, creating more density. The university crammed a huge basketball arena into a small space nearby and now sells parking tickets so game attendees can park in the neighborhood because they made no plan for parking until after the fact. This results in residents and their guests having no street parking space on game days during the spring months unless they arrive before the game goers. These changes have decreased the feelings of peace and tranquility once enjoyed, the beauty and character of the area, and have increased the stress levels in living here through the increase in traffic, loud student parties, and imposing added buildings. Now we're faced with the challenge of an investor asking for a zone change in order to build 3 row houses on one lot. The neighborhood has made its wishes and its refinement plan known in regards to this, but the city seems determined to grant this request regardless. The investor wants it, and the city wants it, so it appears they're going to do it with no respect for the current residents. If there were a reason for it beyond what an investor wants to do for obvious reasons, my opinion might be different, but there is no need in this neighborhood. There is no evident shortage of housing here. Anyone who wants to live here may buy one of the houses currently for sale or rent one of those for rent. That has been true for the 40 years I've lived here. I don't like feeling I have to fight with my city to get fair and just treatment, but that is exactly how it feels. It has been costly and time-consuming for many in this neighborhood to try to preserve its community against the wishes of the city, who has stated no reason for its actions except that it can. And I'll submit this.
Thank you, Ms. Bishop. Next speaker is Camilla Bayless.
I'm Camilla Bayless, and I live at 1621 Orchard Street. I'm one of the Fairmount neighbors appealing the hearings official's decision because I believe it's a very serious violation of our refinement plan. the Fairmount University of Oregon special area study. If the decision is allowed to stand, it would set a dangerous precedent and result in significant negative impact on the low-density residential portions of our neighborhood. The applicant, his representatives, city staff, and the hearings official all acknowledged that the Fairmount SAS is the applicable refinement plan. Then they all proceeded to ignore it as they crafted their various arguments and decisions. In the record, along with the Fairmount Special Area Study, is Resolution 3719, which was the resolution by which Council adopted the first study in 1982. It gives some history, and in my written testimony, I have reproduced Section 1 and Section 2, in which the policies in the refinement plan are adopted. They are adopted as part of the Metro Plan and are recognized as clarifying the intent of the policies, and it also said that the refinement plan is consistent with the Metro Plan and statewide planning goals. This confirms the testimony of a number of neighbors. David Moon said the specific plan should always control over a broad general policy. Jeff Nelson said refinement plan policies refine and supplement the Metro Plan, and many others testified to the role played by the refinement plan. Yet city staff ignored that. They affirmed the hearings officials' imposition of a 14-unit per acre density limitation, claiming it would maintain consistency with the low-density residential designation of the plan. And this is their words, Land Use Policy 3, which precludes zone changes that would increase residential density. So this 14 units per acre overlay that applies to most of the R1 property in Eugene, in the absence of a refinement plan, that would be required to meet the minimum requirement that zone changes not exceed the LDR classification of the Metro Plan. But the refinement plan does exist. Policy 3, in language which is very clear and direct, actually says zone changes to increase residential density or commercial intensity are not supported by this plan. The operative phrase here is zone changes. Everyone has acknowledged that the proposed zone change will increase density.
Ms. Bayless, could we ask you to wrap
Okay.
up, please?
Let me just find. So there are accepted means within R1 to increase density, such as secondary dwellings and partitions. We have no argument with that. It's zone changes to increase density that are not supported. No matter what kind of math the city attempts, general Metro Plan policy should not override the specific provisions of the plan. I also spoke to the statements by Meg Kieran and Paul Conti about the single-family character which currently exists. And I must say, just in closing, the zone change sets a dangerous precedent because the city is saying to the Fairmount neighbors, we could approve row house applications every 500 feet apart in the Fairmount neighborhood, and it would not disturb the single-family character of the neighborhood. The staff response was almost uncalled for. They suggest that if we're worried about this, we should go for a code amendment. I think you all know how difficult that is. We do already have a refinement plan. So something is terribly wrong here. Over the years, we've dedicated an incredible amount of time to creating our refinement plan. We worked on the East Campus plan. We worked on Walnut Mixed Use. We poured thousands of hours in volunteer time into Walnut Mixed Use. 3 times now, we've had to set up a legal fund to protect ourselves against the city. So something is really, really wrong here. So we urge you to make it right. We would like you to honor and carry out the provisions of our refinement plan. We'd like you to reverse the decision of the hearings official and deny the application for zone change. And I'll be submitting written testimony from some neighbors who couldn't be here. And then as a service, I've created an index to the original hearings materials that are on the city website.
Thank you, Ms. Bayless.
Submit that.
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Meg Kirian. Hope I pronounced that correctly.
Good evening. I'm Meg Kieran, attorney for the appellant, Fairmount Neighbors. I briefly want to address the statement of the appellant that was submitted after the decision of the hearings official and the agenda item summary by the staff. The hearings official failed to make a decision consistent with applicable criteria, particularly the criteria that requires that this rezone application must be consistent with the Metro Plan. This is a zoning decision, and although the hearings official's decision states in many instances that the Metro Plan is a guide to legislative action and not to action related to a specific property, in fact, Metro Plan 25, Policy A25, talks about rezone decisions and the stability of older neighborhoods. This is a zoning decision, even though it's a quasi-judicial decision and not a legislative decision, and therefore the provisions of the Metro Plan do apply. In response to the characterization of these Metro Plan and Refinement Plan policies as not being clear and objective, I would briefly like to say a couple of things. One, there's no evidence that row houses are needed housing in this record or in the Eugene Code that I could find. The purpose of the row house zoning is to implement the Metro Plan. There's no they're not specifically called out as needed housing. The Fairmount Special Area Study does not require subjective analysis or value-laden analysis, which is the case law definition of what it means for something that is not clear and objective. It uses words like yard, a goal to keep yards maintained. A yard, that's not an ambiguous term. It talks about stable mix in old neighborhoods. Stable is fairly straightforward. It doesn't require analysis. It means not transitory. It talks about homeowners, preserving the character of the single-family character, which includes homeowners, which is persons who own homes, and families, who are people who are related together. This is not a complex, subtle, value-laden type of analysis to understand what these words of the Fairmount Special Area Study mean. And as the earlier testimony has said, this has been the direction that the city has encouraged this neighborhood association to go in terms of having legislative input. The direction that they've been told to go is work with this refinement plan process. Work with in the 80s with the Fairmount Special Area Study, and then later with the University East Campus Plan, and most recently with the Walnut Special Area. And they've done that. So it's a bit disingenuous now to say that's not good enough.
Ms. Kiernan, could we ask you to
Yeah,
kind of wrap
the
up?
one more point that I wanted to make has to do with the condition of approval to 14 dwelling units per net acre. The record has a variety of different interpretations of what 14 dwelling units per net acre means. In my experience, typically zoning code is going to allow at least a third of the residential buildable lands for auxiliary services like streets or schools or hospitals. And the condition of approval, because of the ambiguity about exactly what 14 dwelling units per acre means, per net acre means, is highly discretionary and subjective, and is itself doesn't satisfy the clear and objective standard. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Karen. Next speaker is Paul Conte.
Are you keeping time, Randy?
I am.
I'm going to check on you.
Okay. Thanks, Paul.
My name is Paul Conti. I live at 1461 West 10th Avenue. I'm chair of the Jefferson West Side Neighbors. I'm not speaking here formally for the Jefferson West Side Neighbors, but I'm speaking in their interest because all neighborhoods have seen the continuing undermining of our refinement plans by staff and applications like this, and that's why I'm involved in this particular decision. I'm very impressed with the articulateness and the sense of playing by the rules that I've heard in working with the Fairmont neighbors and tonight. I just want to point out a couple of highlights. I've submitted written testimony that covers the details. First is that I want to be sure that all the planning commissions, remember the old ones will know this, but some of the new ones may not, that the burden of proof does not shift to the appellants during this process. The burden of proof in your decision still rests with the applicant, and if they have not proved beyond to a reasonable person's conclusion that they are consistent with the mandatory approval criteria, then you must deny their application. I'm just going to speak to a couple of points. First, I'm going to speak to the issue about a zone change to increase density, and this one I really like because it's a very tough question. All you have to do is look at the application and read on page 6, quote, by proposing 3 units on a lot that would traditionally accommodate one single-family dwelling, this proposal is increasing overall residential density, period. That's the applicant. So not too hard. You know, a little analogy or a folksy saying that's applicable to this particular city is if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, and walks like a duck, it's a duck. This is a zone change to increase density. And I've covered some of the technical and legal details in that further in my testimony. Then to the single-family character. Staff pulled a real sleight of hand on this, which has occurred in several places in both this and other analyses, by not including in any of their analysis the rest of that statement, which is to preserve and maintain the single-family character which currently exists. The Planning Commission must take that into account when interpreting the meaning of that particular policy. And I've gone through the evidence in the record extensively. There is not a whit of evidence from the applicant or the staff that demonstrates anything but the single-family character which currently exists comprises solely single-family dwellings. The whole thing about row houses being some form of single-family dwelling is a red herring. The hearings official went down some rabbit hole with R1 that is just absolutely incomprehensible and has nothing to do. It's not probative in terms of the decision here. The other thing is that that policy requires preserving and maintaining. Staff pulled another sleight of hand by addressing that as row houses being, quote, compatible with single-family detached. That's not the policy. The policy is preserve and maintain, and I put in the record the dictionary definitions of those. This is a pretty simple decision, and if y'all recall the Looking Glass decision, which came to a good end, that was a pretty easy decision that Looking Glass and the neighborhood could come to agreement on, and only because of the hurdles that we had to overcome in the process was it so hard. This is another easy decision. It's only made hard because of the lack of diligence and good and a professional work on the part of the staff, and I strongly encourage you to deny this application based on the legal record and the legal applicable mandatory approval criteria. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Conte. Peter Craycraft. Hope I got that right.
So, my name is Peter Craycroft, and I live at 1991 East 19th. I've lived there for 25 years. I've raised 3 children there, and I now welcome them back with their children. So I'm looking at this from the point of view of a family in the neighborhood, and I want to address what Bill Close said, assuming that his testimony is acceptable here. He talked about a fuzzy standard. I see nothing fuzzy about the testimony that's happened so far. What I do see is something very fuzzy about the statement of a little density increase. The reality here, looking at it as a guy who lives down the street, is that if you look at the lots in the neighborhood and you talk about the single-family dwelling, there are places where that's fudged. There are places where there are essentially 2 houses. Usually one is smaller than the other one. So if you accept that and you say, okay, let's try to compare densities here, I don't have an average over the history of the neighborhood of the size of the family in the neighborhood, so I can't tell you exactly what that is, but let's just kind of guesstimate, and let's look first at what is happening here in reality. We have 3 houses crammed onto a small lot. It fills the whole lot, okay? You have 4 bedrooms in a house. That's 12 individuals, okay? That's 12 people. The most probably what you would see in the other circumstances, 6. That's an increase of 200%. Little density increase, question mark. If you look at the number of garbage cans, which is a good indices, you're going from 2 to 4, you're going from 3 to 9. Again, you're going 300%. If you look at the number of cars, you're going from maybe 2 or 3 to 12 spaces for 12 cars. That's, any way you cut it, 300 to 600%. Little density increase, that's a very, very fuzzy and misleading idea. So, also in the neighborhood plan, accepted by the city for years here, you have the idea that you have a front lawn and you have a garden and there's garden space, and if you look at our neighborhood, it's beautiful how the garden spaces are used, and there's no room for a garden on that lot, 0. So in terms of maintaining the character, completely fails. So, if you talk about that sort of impact of this coming into the neighborhood, the impact is huge. Completely changes the character of the neighborhood. Puts a huge burden on all the neighbors in terms of the increases in all of these areas that I've talked about. So, to me, I can't understand how you would come up with any decision other than denying this. So I hope that's where you go. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Craycroft. That's all of the public comments sheets that I have for this appeal. Staff, would you like to respond to any of the testimony? No. Opportunity for applicant rebuttal?
We have nothing.
Nothing. At this point, then, I will close the public hearing and the record. And I guess where we are right now is I would like to ask the commissioners if they have any questions they'd like to direct to staff. Commissioner Belcher.
I'd like staff to respond to the question of, is it possible for us to find findings that would, if we allow the application to be approved, restrict the number of parking spaces for each unit from 4 to 2?
If it's all right with you, we'll take the questions tonight and respond during deliberations at the beginning of the meeting on Thursday. Does that work?
Yeah. Other questions? Commissioner Leidig.
Yeah, 2 or 3 of them. Wonder if you could remind, there's been testimony about which plan overrides the other, Metro Plan versus the Fairmont Plan. If you could remind us of the legalization of that whole issue. Second, to the extent, Steve, to the extent that the hearings official address compatibility regarding the R1 versus the R1.5 zone, specifically in regard to building height, setback, and parking requirements, if you could pinpoint that for us, where if the hearings official addressed those comparisons and how he addressed them, I'd appreciate that.
Sure.
And Emily, maybe if we could ask you, there are questions about this, specifically Ms. Karen talked about policy 825 in the Metro Plan regarding rezoning decisions being the policies applying in a legislative versus a quasi-judicial manner. If you could help talk us through the differences there, how they apply to this one in regard to what the hearings official did. That's it for me.
Other questions? Mr. Baker?
I have a couple of questions as well. Related to the compatibility issue. So I noticed in the record there were distinctions made between the code requirements for R1 and R1.5, for example, building height. So I read through the code sections, which I assume didn't have to be submitted in the record. That's our code. So one of the areas that I was concerned about is the current lot would have to meet the solar setback standards set out in 9.2795, which would protect, I'm thinking in terms of sustainability, which would protect the solar access of the lot to the north. And in fact, the current lot would limit the building height sort of on 5 feet away from the property line to a maximum height of 20 feet. But the way the current code is written, if the property was rezoned to R1.5, then the solar setback standards, the way I read them, wouldn't apply. So then there would be no protection for the property to the north, and the building could be 35 feet high, at the edge there, much higher than would be allowed, and theoretically would limit the accessibility for solar access later on. So I just wanted to confirm that that's the way, and reading the code correctly, and that the setback standards would be removed, and okay. And then maybe there would be some way to consider how to deal with that issue. And then the one other, this is a more general issue, but based upon the argument arguments presented in this case, the implication is that you could take any R1 lot in, say, 24th and Lincoln Street, and if it had an alley, you could apply the same standard. I just wanted to confirm that that would be the case. There don't seem to be any. The hearings official, he dismissed the issue of the nearby zone change because the details weren't at the same level. It didn't answer all of the questions. So aside from that, I'm just trying to clarify what would be unique about this particular site that would allow it, that wouldn't allow it, say, across town on any other R1 lot that met the requirements for an alley access, had an alley, if that's what it's required. I think that does it for me.
Commissioner Randall.
I guess, excuse me, I guess a question that I have would be, we heard testimony about zone changing to increase density, and I guess my question would be, do we have a definition somewhere? Is that increasing the allowable density or increasing the actual density? Is that delineated anywhere in the code.
I'm good. That was my question, too.
Okay. Are there any other questions from the commissioners? Okay, then. I guess we'll move on to the next public hearing, or close this hearing and open another hearing. I'm quite sure about the steps, but the record is closed, and we'll go on to the OBO issue.
If I may, I'd like to thank all those who came to testify
Yes,
tonight.
thank you very much.
Jeff?
Yes.
Can I suggest about a 5-minute time period to let this place calm itself back down again?
Good. I agree. Let's take a 5-minute break. We'll get started. Yeah, we're missing a couple. As soon as they get back, we'll start.
I'll make my request again later.
Okay, so we're very good. With that, the second item on tonight's agenda will be a public hearing on the appeal of the hearings official's decision to approve a request for a zone change from the R3 limited high-density residential zone to the high-density residential zone with a 92 unit per acre density maximum and a site review overlay zone. As with the first hearing tonight, the decision of the Planning Commission on this appeal is quasi-judicial, so we will use quasi-judicial format for this public hearing in accordance with applicable code requirements. The purpose of tonight's hearing is to receive relevant testimony on the appeal before us. We will not be making a decision on the appeal tonight, and again, I want to remind everyone that your testimony must be directed toward the appeal issues and relevant criteria. No new evidence pertaining to appeal issues can be accepted by the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission can only accept argument and analysis related to evidence that is already in the record. Those wishing to speak during this public hearing should have already submitted a completed green slip request to speak form. If you wish to speak and you have not already done so, please submit that form now. Once the public hearing is open, speakers will be called in the following order: those in support of the applicant, those with a neutral position, and those opposed to the applicant. At the end of the testimony, we will ask for any staff responses, and then the applicant will have an opportunity for rebuttal. I'm also supposed to remind everyone that the failure to raise an issue with sufficient specificity to allow the Planning Commission and parties to respond will preclude further appeal on that issue. Before we begin, the Eugene Code 9.7065 requires that planning commissioners disclose any conflicts of interest, ex parte contacts, or biases, abstentions, or challenges to impartiality. Do any commissioners have anything to disclose? Commissioner Baker.
My neighborhood organization is an appellant in this matter, and I have participated in neighborhood meetings regarding the proposed development issue. To avoid any appearance of impartiality pursuant to Eugene Code 9.70653 and Article 2, Section 6 of the Planning Commission bylaws, I will be abstaining from participation in the Planning Commission's consideration of this appeal. Before I do so, however, I am required to seek advice of the other planning commissioners. Would any of you like to be recognized by the chair on this matter? If not, then I abstain.
Thank you, Commissioner Baker. Any other commissioners wishing to speak? Now staff will provide a brief introduction before we begin testimony.
Thank you. Again, my name is Stephen Oakes with the City of Eugene Planning Division. The application on appeal is a zone change from R3 limited high-density residential to R4/92/SR, a high-density residential with a 92 unit per acre density maximum and site review overlay. The hearings official approved the zone change subject to a condition of approval that added a density cap of 92 units per acre. The zone change criteria are found at Eugene Code 9.8865. Concurrent with the zone change application, the hearings official approved applications for a needed housing site review and adjustment review. The site review and adjustment review are contingent on the zone change approval, but not subject to this appeal. The applicant is seeking approval of this zone change request so that it may construct a 4-story, 63-unit apartment complex with parking garage. The subject property is located at 631, 647, and 669 East 15th Avenue on the north side of East 15th Avenue between Hilliard and Patterson Streets. The Eugene hearings official held a public hearing for the subject applications on August 24th, 2011. The hearings official issued a decision approving the concurrent applications on October 3rd. On October 17th, an appeal of the zone change approval was filed by Deborah Healy on behalf of the West University neighbors. The appeal includes 2 primary appeal issues with related subassignments of error under each. Since the appeal, we have received several items of testimony. The first we've already forwarded on to you. It was from Mr. Spickerman, dated October 28, 2011. And then I also have Mr. Connie inform me that in my inbox is further testimony on behalf of the appellant, which I will forward to you in the morning. And then we have also received additional testimony at this point, which I will also forward you to in the morning, looks like from Deborah Healy. Based on the available evidence at the time of the staff report, which starts on page 67 of the packet, staff recommends that the Planning Commission deny the appeal and affirm the hearing official's approval. Unless there are any questions, that's all for staff.
Thank you, Steve. I will now open the public hearing with the applicant and those in support of the applicant. Please give your name and an address when you speak. The first green slip is, I believe, for the applicant, Jim Spickerman.
Kristen is going to speak on behalf of the application.
Okay.
I had put my slip in case I have to speak, particularly on rebuttal.
Understood. We'll keep that in mind. Kristen Taylor.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Kristen Taylor, and I'm with TBG Architects and Planners. I'm the applicant's representative, and our address is 132 East Broadway, Suite 200. And I just have a couple of points, and I want to reference you to a couple of items that were submitted for the hearings official. One is I wanted to let you know that the owner has demonstrated a commitment to the neighborhood by being proactive and in the following ways. He voluntarily, the family, it's a local family, voluntarily submitted a concurrent site review, needed housing application with the zone change application in order to provide a mechanism to further evaluate the project and regulate the building height, as well as allow neighbors to review and provide public input on the intended project concurrently with the proposed zone change. And in addition, the owner communicated with the West University neighborhood chairperson on several occasions and attended the general meeting to discuss the project and listen to feedback. For instance, one of the concerns by the neighbors was safety of the tenants, and safety of the tenants was a factor in the design, and hence the complex is gated and secured. In addition, since the site review submittal, the owner has added a management office to the project located adjacent to the main building entrance in order to further address safety concerns by the neighbors, as well as provide a management presence to the building. So the 2 additional points that I'd like to make is, and it is in the hearings official, our submittal to the hearings official, is that the owner can develop the exact proposed development under R3 by making the following minor changes. 1, slightly change the roof pitch so that the proposed 51 feet height is reduced by 1 foot to meet the R3 requirement, or maximum, of 50 feet. The other is to reduce the number of units from the proposed maximum 92 units per acre, or 63 units, to the maximum allowed in R3, which is 56 units per acre or 38 units. The overall design of the building, which we did model, would not change, just the number of units or front doors and the number of bedrooms per unit. So what I'd like you to do on September 14th, 2011, the submittal that I submitted has a chart, and realistically in the design that we proposed to meet the R3 requirements, we'd, for instance, have 113 bedrooms, whereas our current proposal that was approved within the site review is 107 bedroom units. So actually there's more bedroom units, or excuse me, number of bedrooms, sorry, clarification, number of bedrooms in the R3 proposal that we could put in the current design versus the R492 SR, which is 107. So just take a look at that table if I've confused you. The other couple items that I'd love for you to take a look at, just for context and compatibility, which was another large concern of the neighbors, is the context map. And then we have some context aerial views to take a look at those. And just here's another, during the hearings, in response to the neighbors' concerns during the rebuttal, the owner has added an additional detail in enhancing the pedestrian amenities in front of the apartment complex. And that's all I have. Jim Spickerman is here, as well as myself, on behalf of the applicant to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Next speaker is Deborah Healy.
This is supporting the appeal. So I'm Deborah Healy, 360 East 15th Avenue. I'm speaking on behalf of West University Neighbors Board with this. We are opposed to the application for a zone change. In consideration of what was just said, yes, we did talk with the owner at one of our meetings, and we said to him that the thing that we most objected to is the zone change and the use of the needed housing route, because it eliminates any real reference to neighborhood compatibility using the needed housing site review approach. We also feel very strongly that it is unlikely that they will build the R3 density, maximum density, because there is no market any longer for 5-bedroom units that charge $600+ per bedroom. So I think it is unlikely that they will do this. So we are appealing this because we feel that both the West University Refinement Plan and the Metro Plan policies have been misinterpreted. We're also supported in our appeal by other neighborhoods because we feel this is a major policy challenge to the R3 zone. It does not really give any reason for the R3 zone to exist if any R3 zone can become R4. Let me start also by saying that West University Neighbors is not NIMBY. We're not a not-in-my-backyard neighborhood. We have strongly supported larger projects in our neighborhood, including residential above commercial at 17th and Pearl, residential above commercial on 13th next to the Excelsior, and the large projects, the Parkside by 14th and Hilliard, and Midtown Terrace on 12th. It's not about density that is our issue. We have a lot of it, and we're used to it. However, this is about a zone change that calls the whole R3 zone into question and that makes a mockery of the buffer zone that's in our refinement plan. So the refinement plan sets out different areas. The low-density residential Wooner area that's west of Patterson Street, the historically significant R4 area north of 12th that's protected with a site review, the high-density R4 zone next to the university, and the R3 buffer zone between Patterson and Hilliard that I'll refer to as the Patterson-Hilliard residential corridor. Now, the applicant has argued, and staff seem to have agreed, that R4 could be applied in this zone without any residential, without any zone overlay, without any site review, simply because it's not in the plan that in any way to be denied, that it can simply be turned into R4. This is a misapplication of terminology. The Metro Plan talks about high density as anything over 20 units per acre, as you all know. The West University Refinement Plan talks about medium and high density. And so both R3 and R4 apply here. The medium and high density does not mean that R4 is the appropriate zone in this buffer. It is an odd chain of logic that says because it's over 20 units an acre, it fits the Metro Plan and it's high density. High density is R4, therefore this is R4. Or that's the best I could figure it was, in terms of the chain of logic. There is a clear distinction between the high-density strip next to the university. This is almost entirely multi-story apartment buildings, 2-story, 3-story apartment buildings. The buffer zone is 1- and 2-story detached houses as well as 2- and 3-story apartment buildings. It is not built to a great height or to a great density. It is in between. The misuse of terminology that gives 20 units per net acre, the equivalent of R4, is what has made all of our neighborhoods very, very concerned about the loss of R3. If you can apply the Metro Plan and say it's more than 20 units per acre, so it's high density, we have no R3. We have only R4. The other piece of it was that since it's a buffer, then anything less than 112 units per acre and presumably lower than 65 feet in height, which is the limit at that part of the R4 zone, would be perfectly fine. They use, as an example, the rezone earlier from 1994, which was 64 units an acre and only 2 stories. The difference between 92 units an acre and 112 units an acre is not what I would consider significant. It's also, when we go from theory to reality and look at this proposal, the 1- and 2-story houses, the 2- and 3-story apartments in the buffer zone are contrasted with the 2- and 3-story apartment buildings in the high-density zone. There are, further to the east, we've got 2- and 3-story fraternity and sorority houses, which are, generally speaking, on the historic register or considered historic. None of these are likely to disappear anytime soon. None of the 2- and 3-story apartment buildings are going to turn into 4- to 5-story, 6-story apartment buildings, simply because it's too expensive. What we're getting in the buffer zone at 4 stories, 50 feet, would be taller than anything in the high-density zone, and just about as tall as the church, lower than the size of the church steeple. So we're talking about something that, when you look on the ground, is very much more dense than anywhere that exists in the buffer zone or the high-density zone. So now, in the West University Refinement Plan, the clear text says the land use diagram reinforces existing zoning patterns and does not call for zoning reclassifications. To us, R3 to R4 is a rather large zoning reclassification. It's particularly true when you look at the size of the subject property. It is 3 lots, approximately 185 feet along East 15th Avenue and going from East 15th to the alley. Now, you had in earlier testimony this figure, which shows a representation of the houses on the side. Okay, the houses on the side. Okay, so you can see the 2-story house on one side, the 1-story garage, and 1.5-story house on the other side. This is Hilliard and Patterson on the 2 sides. The building in between was taken from the diagram given to as part of the application and is as close as possible to scale. So if anything, the building is a little smaller than it should be to be in scale. And so you can see that this is a spot zoning change, but it's a spot zoning change that changes the whole block. We're not talking about a small increase. We're talking about a change in policy. And given that we are currently engaged in opportunity siting and a thoughtful process to change density, to have this kind of density increase for a whole block that will change the character of that block simply because the owner would like to do it does not seem appropriate. If the owner had owned property on the other side of Patterson, we would not be having this discussion. It would be an R4, it would be perfectly fine. But it's in the buffer zone, it is R3. And to change it to R4 and so substantively change the zoning of the area seems inappropriate. And from a policy perspective, going against the current policy that encourages opportunity citing and a thoughtful approach to planning. The other issue that we wish to raise is the concept of livability, and that we do not see this in keeping with A12 or A25 from the Metro Plan. It is spot zoning, and spot zoning is inherently destabilizing. Those buying property in the area don't know if next to them they're going to have the R3 zone, or somebody's going to come along and say, well, gee, I'd rather have R4. Let me put something bigger there. You cannot predict what's going to happen when you have spot zoning. And we can see the second application of spot zoning in the area is more dense, higher, a taller building than the earlier application of spot zoning, which is further proof of the destabilizing effect of spot zoning. A classic textbook case of what this does when you choose to rezone a spot instead of thinking about it from a comprehensive way. One more quick
Ms. Seeley,
thing.
can you wrap up, please?
To wrap up, we don't think that a site review will protect the historic existing and future neighborhood quality. This particular change is going with the needed housing site review criteria. Those eliminate all mention of neighborhood compatibility. So if it's going in with needed housing, there is no protection for neighborhood compatibility. So for these reasons, we hope that you will deny the zone change and hear our appeal. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Healy. Next speaker is Carolyn Jacobs.
Carolyn Jacobs. I am chairperson of the South University Neighborhood Association. I live at 2040 Agate Street. In the South University neighborhood, the northern edge, which abuts the university and is contiguous with the West University neighborhood, is a 1 block by 9 block area zoned R4. Between that R4 and the R1 area, which constitutes about 75% of our neighborhood, lies a strip half a block wide and 9 blocks long, which is the medium-high density R3 zone. In recent years, City Council policy decisions were made to strengthen the ability of this particular R3 to function as a buffer or a transition zone between the extremes of the high and low density areas. Now, despite the clear intentions of these decisions, significant high-density development during the last few years has resulted in substantial and irreversible negative impacts on this neighborhood. Threats to the livability and ultimately the integrity of the neighborhood are now impossible to ignore. So in a neighborhood like the South University one, which has no refinement plan, again, we have no refinement plan, which is a document which might otherwise provide adequate protection in a case such as this, a decision to allow the simple upzoning of R3 property to R4 status will suddenly render the R3 designation meaningless, as all R3 property would be immediately upzonable to R4. Any reassurances that we ever had that the R3 area would function as a much-needed buffer or transition zone will have evaporated. I am very concerned that the Planning Commission be aware of the extent to which the findings and decisions in this case could profoundly affect another neighborhood such as ours. The decision reached by the hearing official would make us subject to unconstrained upzoning of the very area that was clearly meant to minimize the negative effects of high-density development. it would be very, very difficult for us to survive the destabilizing impact of newly upzoned R4 development when permitted alongside an R1 neighborhood of single-family residences. I ask that you seriously consider the broadest implications of the case before you today, and that you seek to determine whether the intention of City Council policies is actually being accomplished with what you decide. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jacobs. Next speaker is Paul Conte.
Can I shift positions? Would you mind if I switch positions for the class? I'm Bill.
Bill Aspergen.
I'm Bill Aspergren, 1939 Alder Street, and on the board of South University. My house happens to be in the R3 buffer zone, and hopefully it will stay that way because the lot directly to the south of me is R1. At any rate, I'm not going to discuss the legal aspects of this appeal. I attended the original hearing and I've read the various written testimonies. After reviewing this information, there is no doubt in my mind that the hearings official mistakenly approved this request. However, I'm troubled by the staff's continuing misinterpretations of comprehensive plan policies and land use code, and this is leading to the erosion of the limited protections existing for the neighborhood livability and stability that still remain. West University is the densest area of the city. The Eugene Police Department spends an inordinate amount of effort babysitting, and that's a quote from Lieutenant Sam Kamkar that was in the paper just a day or two ago, babysitting students in this area rather than dealing with other problems. Rezoning this parcel in West University so it can increase density even further is a mistake. If Eugene's zoning is to have any meaning, setting a precedent like this must be avoided. Many of us have devoted significant time to the Envision Eugene process. Rick, John, Randy, Emily, all of us have. We started, what, in the middle of '09? Was that it? We've spent a lot of time on this. One of the major pillars is protect, restore, and enhance neighborhood livability. The proposed project strikes out on all three of these areas. It doesn't protect, it doesn't restore, and it doesn't enhance the West University neighborhood livability. This request for rezoning is not compatible with the Envision Eugene pillar and will result in a building that dwarfs surrounding houses and is incompatible with the neighborhood. When you folks on the Planning Commission make a decision on this zoning change, each of you needs to look carefully at the potential implications to be sure City Council policies such as Envision Eugene are supported. I'm convinced the best outcome for the neighborhood and community is to deny this zoning request. And it just dawned on me while we were sitting here that this particular project will be on 15th, and that's a major bicycle route, and as a bicycle rider, I just as soon not see a lot more traffic and density added to that area. It's already quite dangerous. At any rate, those are my comments, and I will submit a written one here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Aspirin. Mr. Paul Conte.
My name is Paul Conte. I live at 1461 West 10th Avenue. I'm chair of the Jefferson West Side Neighbors, and I'm not speaking formally on behalf of them, but I'm speaking for their interests. The reason I'm here is twofold. One is that the Jefferson West Side Neighbors includes some significant areas of R3, and most of those are zoned in a non-compliant fashion, and we're going to take care of that. But a lot of them are also zoned in a compliant fashion on land that's designated high-density residential, and they are covered by a refinement plan or refinement plans. Looking at those would be wiped off the map. They would become R4 because if this hearing's officials' decisions and the premises for it were approved. This is another one of those cases which is really instructive in terms of playing by the rules and doing a diligent job in terms of evaluating the approval criteria. So there are two major issues here. One of them, there's a lot of subordinate issues which are legally just as compelling if the approval criteria aren't met. But there's two big issues here. One issue is that you can go through this decision and you cannot find any way that the hearings official or the staff's comments give any meaning to the R3 zone. Effectively, based on this decision, even with the refinement plan in place, every R3 zone could be replaced with R4 unless there was a refinement plan that explicitly, by name, excluded R4 zoning, or by allowing only R3 zoning. This is a profound and hugely flawed decision. The esteemed Deputy City Attorney will take you through the chutes in terms of the statutory requirements to give full meaning to the local ordinances, so I'm not going to go through that. It's in this document. It's somewhat technical, but it's absolutely critical. It's not a pedantic issue, and if you think about it, it's like City Council sat down, wrote the policies for the Metro Plan, approved the West University Refinement Plan, and went to great pains to rejigger the land use code for R3 and R4 so that there would be two zones that implemented high-density designations. And this sweeps all of that aside, a quasi-judicial decision that sweeps aside these huge decisions by the council. So staff's a little bit presumptuous to suggest to the Fairmont neighbors that they should go seek legislative remedies when staff is willing to sweep aside such broad legislative actions in the past. I want to focus, though, on another side of it for just a minute, and I think we got plenty of time, so this is unfortunately, given the amount of things that had to be covered in the last week, this testimony went in earlier today, so you haven't seen it. But I'm assuming that you have at least looked at the decision, the staff's analysis, and the the appeal statement. And if you have, you'll understand that there is this cloud of confusion that has been fomented around the West University Refinement Plan. And it centers around the fact that the subject area is designated, quote, medium and high-density residential. And oh my God, what could that possibly mean? So staff has taken the view that, well, it obviously means just what the text says. It means that it covers both MDR and HDR. Well, of course, that leads to nonsensical conclusions, and so doesn't stand up under further examination. But there's another thing that you need to know. So staff didn't tell you that at the time that the West University Refinement Plan was actually being developed and adopted, 1980 to 1982. The R3 zone, well, first off, the refinement plan defined high-density, medium-density residential as what it is today, 14.28 dwelling units per net acre to 28.56 dwelling units per net acre as the equivalent for the 10 to 20 dwelling units per gross acre. So keep that range in mind, though, 14.28 to 28.56. And high density was 28.56 and above. That's what the medium density and high density residential designations were at the time of this adoption of this refinement plan. The R3 zone was from 15 units to, let me check my notes to make sure I speak correctly on this. Sorry for that. I think I have it right in my head, but I don't want to misspeak. Between 50, so the R3 zone at that time was between 15 and 40 dwelling units per net acre, between 15 and 20. So here was the problem faced by the authors of the West University Refinement Plan and solved by them, and that solution was understood and approved by City Council, was that If they just relied on the Metro Plan designations, they had two choices. They could designate it as medium-density residential, in which case they would cap it at 28.56, and therefore, because the Metro Plan prevails over, the comprehensive plan prevails over the code, R3 at that time would have had its top range truncated, and it was zoned R3. That's what that whole area was zoned. On the other hand, if they designated high-density residential, it would be opened clearly to R4, which was not what was intended. So instead, in their innocence, they crafted a new term, medium and high-density residential. And that term had as its intent allowing the preservation, as the West University Refinement Plan clearly states, allowed the preservation of the existing zoning, which was R3, and it allowed that R3 zoning to be used to its full extent at the time. There is no mystery to this. If you look at the other pieces of the West University Refinement Plan, and I go through this in detail here, it all fits together hand in glove. So there is no question here that the medium and high-density residential's proper interpretation requires you looking at the context, and that is legally required by statutory rules of interpretation. Again, the Deputy City Attorney will I'll be glad to fill you in on that. But you cannot look at this in isolation. You have to look at it within the context, and then it all becomes perfectly straightforward. Medium and high-density residential designation in the West University Refinement Plan, combined with the express intent to make this a buffer between an R4 zone and a lower end of the R3 range zone, combined with the express language that says this refinement plan essentially does not support changes to zone, makes it clear that the R3 zone should be preserved in that area. It's as simple as that. And if you follow through on that, there is then, it also is consistent with the Metro Plan policies, because if they had been properly interpreted by, analyzed by staff, and interpreted by the hearings official, the R3 zone would have meaning. It would have meaning that in these particular circumstances, the lower of the two high-density residential zones is appropriate and meant to be maintained. It's really not a very complicated case. Again, something that should be simple and straightforward has been turned into a huge hill for residents of this neighborhood and other neighborhoods to climb to try and get you all to bring some sense and order to this process. So with that, I respectfully ask that you simply play by the rules, follow the law, and deny this application. And I want to make one final parting comment. When you get together for your deliberations, there won't be any participation by the applicant or by the appellants or by anybody else, but there will be some other people other than the commissioners in the room. And one of those people that's going to be in the room with you is going to be a knowledgeable, impartial observer, and I hope you will look to her for guidance on this. The other people in the room that are going to be speaking are going to be advocates, and I think that you should take what they're telling you in that kind of light. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Conte. Is there any response from staff? Opportunity now for the applicant to make a rebuttal. Thank you. At this point, then, I will close the public hearing and close the record. I am going to. Now I'm going to ask the commissioners whether they have any questions for staff to pursue before we deliberate.
Yeah.
Commissioner Leidig.
Yeah, getting my thoughts together, the questions, but I take it this last information that Mr. Conte gave us regarding the history of the R3 zone is in the testimony that we might not have received yet?
That is correct.
Okay. I think we should pursue that and how that pertains to what the hearings official may or may not have considered in his evaluation. My concern, to the extent, Emily, that we can go this far is some past history with zoning codes that were at a certain standard when certain planning designations were adopted, and then the zoning code changed and created some issues, and I'm wondering if we're getting into the same kind of concerns here. So that would be one. And also, Steve, I'm going to ask you to do the same thing that I asked you in the other matter. To the extent that the hearing official may have discussed the differences between what is allowed in terms of heights and bedrooms and dwelling units and parking criteria in the R3 zone versus the R4 zone. I'd like a discussion about, or if you can help us pinpoint where he has addressed that, if he did.
Okay.
Okay? I'm still collecting my thoughts, so I'll let somebody else.
Commissioner Duncan.
Clarity on Commissioner Ledick. You were requesting, just, I want to make sure that you're getting what I want. You were asking for sort of a history of the change of R3 and R4 from when the refinement plan became effective to now? Did you ask for that? Is that what I was getting?
My understanding is that's kind of laid out in the testimony that you will get from Mr. Conti if it's consistent with what we've seen in the other hearing. And I'll take a look at that and confirm that, that it is accurate, and also see that it's not new evidence, that we can look at it.
Okay.
Does that cover it?
Well, maybe some clarity then. It seems to me in a past hearing that appeal that we had, because it's public information, it's part of our public domain information, that we can get sort of a history of what occurred for unit changes and density requirements by zoning, sort of in a chronological order, so we can see what was actually in place at the time. I haven't seen Mr. Conti's information. Maybe that's what's there, but I'm trying to.
Yeah, actually, I think that's probably different. I mean, what we expect to see is when amendments were made to the code and the refinement plan in relationship to the zoning and the refinement plan text, so that you could see what was likely intended when the text was first adopted, that
Right.
sort of thing. Not necessarily what kind of development has taken place.
No, I don't care about that. I want to know sort of at what time, when the refinement plan was written, what was in place at that time for densities, and then what changed over time. Exactly what you were talking about.
Yeah, I think it's probably laid out pretty well, and I'll just do my checking.
Okay.
Sorry, Commissioner Belcher.
Mr. Jerome, could you also give us your understanding of just to what degree the intent plays in our deliberation when we get there?
Yeah, I'd be happy to follow up, remind you of sort of how you're to look at that in the process.
Thank you.
Commissioner Ledick.
Yeah, and the other aspect, too, a number of people this evening talked about this buffer aspect of the R3 zone in this area, and if you could pinpoint what the hearings official, how he may have addressed that as well, I'd appreciate it. There's a lot of testimony in this, and if you could help us zero in on that, I'd appreciate it.
Commissioner Duncan.
One of the other things that would be helpful, and I'm sorry I didn't get through a lot of this part of the packet since I was working on the first one more, because I thought we were actually going to start on deliberations on the first one tonight more, would be the discussion about needed housing.
Yeah.
And how it fits into this application. If it's
Was that raised in this one too?
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
Thanks.
Other questions? Commissioner Belcher?
Specifically to needed housing, could you give us your interpretation about, the applicant argued needed housing helps the neighborhood, the appellants argued that it did not help the neighborhood.
Okay,
It
I'm
made
sorry,
life
yeah.
harder.
But in this one where they sought the needed housing site review as an option on top of their, right.
Right.
The two sides see it very differently, and I'd like to hear your opinion.
I have question off of, not off of the testimony tonight, but off of the AIS, page 65, where there's an analysis. It's the first full paragraph, beginning with the word "the appellate." Go down to the sentence that says, contrary, I'll wait for you all to catch up there. Contrary to the appellate's arguments, so the West University District does in fact distinguish other sub-areas where R3 is the only residential zone that can implement. And I guess I wanted to get a feel from you about how that area lays out. In other words, we've had a lot of talk tonight about how it's, in the eyes of the residents, it seems to be very, very weak, and that R3 can just be bumped up. And I'm reading here that there are cases where R3 seems to be protected. I'd like to know where that's at. Commissioner Leidig.
Sorry, one more for you, Emily.
Sorry.
We don't want you to be bored.
This is Thursday, right? Just checking.
This is Thursday?
The deliberations are day after tomorrow.
We're doing both of them?
Maybe we could talk about that.
We will.
Okay.
In the AIS, there's a discussion about ORS 174.010 talking about construction. This is getting real attorney-ish. Wonder if you could maybe school us a little bit about what all that means.
Can I just do that right now?
Please.
That statute is a good guide for you, and it arguably does apply, but it sort of applies in the context of how you interpret generally. So this is what you all are used to. It's the look at the provision. Is it unclear? If it's clear, you're done. If the provision is not clear, you look at the text, you look at the context, and preferably the context of what's right around it and what was done at the same time it was adopted. And if you need to go a little further out and to the point that it's reasonable to do so, that makes sense. And if you're making an interpretation, I'm going to want you to make it very clearly so we can put it in the final decision. And in the process, I almost said context, in the process of doing that interpretation, LUBA has said that that statute, which basically is direction to courts when courts are interpreting statutes, it says essentially don't add language that's not there and don't deny meaning to language that is there. Give every word meaning and don't add words that aren't there. And that LUBA has said, yes, we're going to do that when we interpret things, and we're going to look at that as a guide when local governments are interpreting things. There are some references to how you're supposed to interpret your code provisions throughout these appeals that reference cases and rules that actually don't apply to you, because you're the Planning Commission. We're looking at a hearings official decision, and some of those standards that are cited actually only apply to a governing body decision where there's some deference given. But each time those are applied or referenced, I don't think it's going to trip you up. You all are used to interpreting your code in the way that I just described, and I actually don't plan on giving you any more of a dissertation than you're getting right now unless you need it.
Okay.
And do what you usually do, and I'll be here.
What page is that reference?
Where did I find it? Looks like it's on page 64.
Thank you. Of the AIS?
Of the AIS, yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Any other items from staff?
Can I know? Can I ask
Oh, yeah, we were going to talk about timing. I think
Yeah.
you wanted to talk about
Because we do have the applicant here if we need to seek more time, and I may be the advocate for doing that. You're not smiling.
It's an option, I don't care.
Are we in the 120-day issue?
Which one's?
So we have two deliberations set as of right now. There's the 3rd and the 8th, which are coming up extremely fast. And on this application, with an extension that was granted, we're November 19th with the 120-day, which would give another week if necessary. And I think we're about in the same boat on the Orchard Street one. So
it makes sense that we use these deliberation dates, but I may call the applicant's attorney tomorrow to see if there may be some flexibility in time. Jim, listening to me? Okay.
Always good to hear from you.
And so we're scheduled for Thursday. We also have next Tuesday, I believe, right? As additional deliberation time if need be. So there's that as well to piggyback off of if need be. So,
Commissioner Duncan.
I would request that we plan deliberation for Orchard Street on Thursday and this one next Tuesday. I could use a little more time.
yeah, the only issue is just whether or not
We can get done with Orchard Street in
right,
one? Well,
you're kind of pushing that other one out, and that's our last day. So that's the only concern I'd have, unless we get some additional time. And if I can, Steve, one of the two we had some concerns with absolute deadline on. Which one?
it's the OBO that there's an absolute deadline towards the end of November because of the they put their zone change on hold so that the site review could catch up with it. So it's an overall they won't be allowed to give any more extensions to the time
When does that
limit.
run?
I believe it's November 22nd, but I'll confirm that date.
So that's tight.
Okay, Jim, I probably won't call you.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the point is that's an absolute deadline. We must be done by that point in time. They need to be done by that time as well.
so I'm not sure what you're telling us.
If we bump the OBO to next week,
So you would assume that we would get through Orchard
I don't know.
in 2 hours?
I'm not sure.
and-
I just don't know if we'd want to artificially push it off now. I think we just hold the ball on the agenda and hope we can get as far as we can.
Commissioner Belcher.
Perhaps you might want to call the applicant in the other deliberation, see if they'd be willing to extend.
Yeah, just do OBO first.
Let you know, because I've been concentrating on Orchard first.
Yeah, and just to remind you, you have quite a number of planning commission meetings coming up, too, so we'll have to find time to squeeze it in there, because your other regular meetings, I think, are already booked, so keep that in mind. I think the weeks of the 14th, I think it is also at least a couple meetings that week as well.
The overtime pay is good.
I'm just warning you.
Especially ours.
You too, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions? Any other items? Then we'll adjourn it. Thank you.